And in trying to really understand what God is like, there are characteristics. God is all powerful, all knowledgeable. But if you look at the world of religion that I would have to choose from, and if I look at Eastern religions and Buddhism and Hinduism, and I look at Western religions, the one critical differentiating characteristic seems to be the claim in Western religions that God is a person. Now, if I step back, I think that that's terribly anthropomorphizing. That's reading into God what we are, to call God a person. Yet theologians and philosophers, and you call God a person. How can you do that?
Well, I call God a person because God has certain features or traits that persons have. You just alluded to his knowledge and his power. So those are the kinds of things to know. To be a knower would require having some conscious states, would require having something like a mind, and not only does God have those properties of being able to do nearly anything and knowing everything. God was a creator, so God is an actor or an agent. He's the one who created the world, and that's a kind of personal thing to do. So I think even if you list just the philosophical concepts or the attributes that the philosophers like to talk about, like omnipotence and omniscience and being a creator, and I should add, being morally perfect. Those are all traits or properties that I think it only makes sense to ascribe to persons.
If I look at the Eastern religions, like Buddhism, certain strains of Hinduism, some of those same characteristics are sort of built into the structure of reality without the ultimate being a person. If you have reincarnation being driven by some sort of karma related to your life, so there's some kind of knowing built into the system. Maybe it's not an agent sentient knowing, but it's knowing. How does it know which way to move you in the reincarnation cycle if there's no way of knowing? And even if there's no creation per se, the ultimate cosmic consciousness is somehow responsible for reality. So you can build some of those same characteristics into a system without a person, without the imagining, I don't mean that pejoratively, but the imagining of God in the form of human beings.
Well, I'm not really sure whether reincarnation, for example, or the process of reincarnation, which seems, well, I'm completely out of my depth here. I don't know anything about it, but as I understand it, somehow you're reincarnated in a way that reflects your previous life, and if karma is at work
right,
there.
and so that's a kind of knowing.
You did a good thing, then you'll come back in a better way.
So the ultimate who was in charge of that process has a knowing capacity, even if it's not conscious.
What I don't see is why I think there's an ultimate in charge of that process, that's a guided process or a process that's the result of some intelligent being who's
I didn't say intelligent being. What I'm saying is that there's a knowing in the system of reality. I'm not saying I believe that, but I'm just trying to understand why we have this person and why God needs to be a person. Could not some of the same things happen without God being so personalized?
I mean, some of the same things could happen, I suppose. Perhaps it could happen that there's the regular operation of causal laws, which non-believers think is completely independent of any God. So if the regular operation of causal laws is in some sense analogous to this other law of karma, then I suppose you could imagine that you could have either one without there being a personal God or a God who's a person. But I guess I do think that it's a consequence of the way God has been conceived in Western theism as a being who's a knower and who's an agent, who's a creator, who's morally good, who's got moral attributes. All of that seems to me to suggest that God then is also someone who's got a mind in some way, is an agent in some way, which are the primary personal traits.
Does it disturb you that we're building God as a human being, only each characteristic that we have, we're saying God is much better, maybe even the best possible of all of our kinds of characteristics?
It does bother me a little bit. I mean, you mentioned anthropomorphism, and are we making God in our own image? Are we making God look like a human being? And I do think we have to worry about that. In a non-philosophical mode, Annie Lamott recently wrote something like this. You can tell you're making God in your own image if he turns out to hate the same people you do. And I think that ought to keep us, people working in philosophy of religion, a little bit humble to make sure we're not just trying to impose our Western, elite, educated values on what God is like. And I think there certainly is a danger of doing that if you keep focusing on his knowledge and his power, and you don't emphasize, say, some more traditionally feminine aspects. It seems like it's a kind of male-oriented view of what God is like. So how about emphasizing what God does for people, or what God cares about for people, or emphasizing what God wants for people? As soon as you bring in some of these other aspects of what God is like, his caring for people, his will for people, his offer of grace, and so on, those are all actions that seem to require being a person to do. So I think the parts about God's nature that are the ones that are important for a religious life are ones that really do emphasize his care for people, his concern for people, his will for their lives, his desire to draw people close to him. All of those things which are religiously important are also traits that I think require being a person.
If I just sit back and think about all this, I suddenly feel, wow, it's really odd for the ultimate ground of being of all reality to be a person. It just strikes me as just funny.
But the ultimate ground of all reality, if the ground is, say, someone who created all of reality, who made all this stuff, that sounds eminently like a person to me. If you think of it as, oh, the underlying foundation of everything, deep down at the very base is this godlike substance on which everything rests. Well, I agree, that doesn't sound very much like a person.
Look, I don't like that. I'm not saying I like an immaterial, impersonal kind of goo that's kind of oozes beneath the foundations of reality. I would prefer a person. I prefer you to be God. I mean, you're good. I wish you were in control. You have very good ideas. I'd love to be in your hands. But it just seems odd that a person would be at the ground of all being.
So thanks for the vote of confidence. If elected, I will not serve. But it's sort of, I just can't shake the idea that if there really is something that's in control, really did something to make the world, that was an agent, an actor. And I think if we sort of reflect on our own experience, you could think about the world as just things running on in causal relations, and then, well, maybe there's something more fundamental. But if you think about in your own case, what you're more aware of is your own ability to do things, to move, to make things happen. Simple little things, your own ability to your hand goes up, your own ability to do that from inside. It seems to me like a more fundamental thing is being an agent. And so not at all surprising if a more fundamental thing is an agent who made the world.
So the argument is from the existence of our consciousness, which is certainly a very powerful reality and potentially an argument. You marry that with the structure of reality and therefore conclude that God has a similar kind of personhood.
Well, I didn't mean to do quite that, really. I was just being kind of picky in replying to you. You had said it seemed weird to you.
Yeah, it
and
does.
I was trying to show why it shouldn't seem weird to you. Okay. So I wasn't saying you should reason as I'm an agent, therefore God's an agent, but you should reason like this. Well, I'm an agent, I realize that, and in my own little sphere, I make things happen. So it's not all that surprising if what makes the whole thing happen is someone similarly capable, similarly able to make things happen by force of will. So I didn't mean to say, therefore, God is like that. I just meant to say, I don't think you should be quite so surprised by that.